All right, everybody, let's take a look at writing an NPLEX question. A few of these slides are actually coming out of NPLEX review that we're doing soon. So if you come, which I hope you will, we'll discuss this a little bit more. The thing to keep in mind is NPLEX is testing competencies. So the whole thing is mapped to competencies. There's also a mapping to subject areas, and they derive some of those subject areas doing a survey every 7 years or so of hundreds of NDs and see what they use in their practice. But there is a list of competencies, and so they start with the competency and they create items and attach the items to cases. So a case could address several competencies, which it always does, and one competency, or at least let's say a competency area like management of heart disease, chronic heart disease, is probably they're testing across different cases. Perhaps the nutrition and botanicals in one case and the diagnosis in another. So there's a certain amount of overlap, which I think is a good thing. So when you're writing a question, you can try to think of what level you want to write the question at. So if you're doing a part 2 question, do you really want something that just does recall? So if you're trying to see if an entry-level physician is really at the level of an entry-level physician and they're reasonably able to take what they learned in school and bring it forward, is it just recall, or is that a higher level, like applying and analyzing? And you're going to get a range of questions on NPLEX, but there's going to be more that play up here. So for instance, if you got information, what would you do with it relative to a case? Would it change your test menu? If you had several bits of diagnostic data, how would you put that together to choose a certain treatment plan, or to choose one treatment plan over the other? Which one is better? Which one is superior? Which one would be more preferable? So there's certainly knowledge behind it all, but they're trying to get at, can you take A and B and decide to do C? So you're going to see all of those. We can do more of this in the review, but keep in mind that questions should be fairly reliable. So different people at different sites across North America, maybe even different administrations of the exam, so different dates, should be reasonably close in how they answer the question. It's not at the whim of who taught them. Now here's a reliable question. How many eggs are there in a dozen? And most people are going to pick C, I hope. They didn't put in a baker's dozen, so it's not too misleading, right? But that's not very relevant. So it's not really externally valid. It doesn't really test how much you really know about clinical nutrition. So that's kind of what you're looking for too, is, here's a valid nutrition item. What would happen if somebody went on a low carb kind of diet, right? And you're going to see maybe some people would say they're going to lose a lot of weight. Some would say they're going to lose a little weight. Hopefully no one's going to say they're going to gain weight, or they're going to yo-yo, although they might. Now you'll notice something here. The more validity you get, just like practice, it's not always frankly obvious. It's not always plain as day, the difference between best and not best, or correct and wrong. So as an exam goes up in validity, it can suffer a little bit from reliability and things can seem ambiguous. Don't let that throw you. And if you're writing some questions for Dr. Blessoff, don't worry if you have a couple pretty close questions. The acid test is, if you really thought it through, would 2/3 of the students be able to, who knew their stuff, be able to reason that out? And that's all we really expect from a board exam. I can't go into it in this little screencast, but there's various checks and balances about the fact that a good question doesn't always have perfect reliability. One thing I've probably brought up in class is they get a bunch of us to sit together and write the exact same exam the day after NPLEX ends. And the more questions there are where the runner-up correct answer or two sticks really close to the correct one and it just doesn't seem fair, the more we start making adjustments in the student's favor. So there's a whole process at work there. So when you write your questions, try to think of here's the format for a case. I don't know if you're having to create this, but these stems, in essence, if you read this part and covered up this part, and you knew something about the case, you should be able to do a pretty good guess most of the time. And it's not only a good way to take the test, but also a good way to write it. So, and you're also thinking of a competency. So let's just end with that. So here, if you look at what they're really after, to me, this looks like, can someone take basic clinical information and decide if someone's having a myocardial infarction or another cause of chest pain? So can you effectively use, can you effectively use a primary or first line test like an EKG or enzymes, cardiac enzymes, and know what it means? And I guess the difference here is it's getting a little bit more into rapid interpretation of EKG, which to me is a slightly different competency. But if you look underneath it, it's kind of the same. Can you use an EKG or a radiograph or a lab test or something with a fast turnaround to differentiate coronary originating pain from other causes, such as costochondral syndrome? That's what they want to know. Why? Because that's a pretty darn important thing to be able to do without having to go running to someone else, which, if we get a really crazy EKG, we'll be going to a cardiologist who has spent 5 years looking at arrhythmias, but as a primary care doctor, that first line sort of reasoning is our responsibility to the best of our ability. So that's what they're after. And when you write these questions, try to get at something a little deeper than just recall. So good luck.